So the other night, I decided I was going to be one of those people who cooks dinner like a responsible adult. You know, the kind of person who makes a recipe, sets a timer, and somehow ends up with something edible instead of ordering pizza. I told myself, tonight I'm going to impress my wife. Tonight, to show that I'm capable of functioning in the kitchen. That's where the first mistake happened. Thinking confidence alone can replace skill. You don't just wake up one day and become Gordon Ramsay. Wake up one day and discover that knives are sharp and pans are tricky, but I wasn't worried yet. I had a plan. Step 1. Step 2, I cook food. Step 3, don't burn the house down. Simple, right? I started off okay, chopping vegetables like a chef in a YouTube tutorial, feeling pretty proud of myself. And then the recipe said, heat the pan on high. I turned the burner on and immediately started hearing sounds that were alarming. There was this strange hissing noise, and then I saw smoke rising like the pan was holding a tiny barbecue party. And I thought, that's fine. That's probably normal. The pan is just warming up. But as it turns out, when you leave a pan unattended for more than 10 seconds, it begins plotting against you. I glanced over for just a second. Suddenly there was fire, not like a little flame, like call the fire department, fire. And in that moment, I realized cooking dinner isn't just about following directions. It's about survival instincts. You don't have at 8 p.m. The hooks kept coming when my wife walked in and saw me standing there like I was auditioning for a disaster movie. She asked, "You okay?" And I just looked at her and said, yeah, everything's fine maybe. Which is Nate speak for Cal 911 because I've ruined the kitchen and possibly the house. I grabbed a towel to put out the flames, but I forgot that towels are flammable. So now the towel was on fire too, which is exactly what the recipe didn't warn me about. And somewhere in the background, the smoke alarm had started its solo performance, wailing like it was judging me for every life decision I've ever made. After fumbling around, waving my arms and muttering, "It's just cooking. It's supposed to be fun," I finally managed to get the fire under control. By that point, the vegetables were charred beyond recognition, the pan was ruined. I was pretty sure I earned a spot in the kitchen hall of shame. My wife handed me a glass of wine, and I sat down, realizing that cooking dinner is like a video game where every level is rigged against you. I don't know why anyone makes it look easy on TV. The moral of the story, or at least the punchline, is that some things should remain untested. Some recipes are traps, some pans are enemies, and I will never again trust myself to be a responsible adult in the kitchen. So now, whenever I feel ambitious, I just order pizza and feel good about my survival instincts. Because there are battles in life you don't need to fight. And this kitchen fire was one of them. The moment I decided to cook dinner like a responsible adult, I felt this surge of confidence that was completely unearned. I was standing in my kitchen with a knife in one hand, a recipe on my phone in the other, and thinking, this is it. I'm finally going to prove I can be a functional human being. And that's the first mistake, the assumption that optimism alone can replace skill. You see, confidence in Nate Bargatze's comedy isn't just funny because it exists. It's funny because the audience can sense the impending doom before the character does. I was chopping vegetables, humming to myself and imagining how impressed my wife would be when she saw me transform our dinner from ordinary to gourmet. I didn't yet understand that ambition in the kitchen is dangerous. Overconfidence is a slow burning fire that usually ends in smoke alarms. The hook here is in that optimism, because viewers instantly relate to the feeling of trying something new with zero practical preparation, and they're already bracing themselves for what's coming next. What makes this opening so engaging is the way the mind narrates itself during overconfidence. You start rationalizing everything, exaggerating minor skills, and pretending that watching a 5-minute tutorial on YouTube qualifies you as a professional. Every small motion, slicing onions, dicing peppers, suddenly feels monumental. You describe it in a way that's calm, measured, almost serious, which heightens the humor, because the audience knows the stakes are way higher than you realize. The first chop of the knife doesn't just cut a carrot. It symbolizes the beginning of an ambitious experiment that you are hilariously unprepared for. And you play it straight because nothing is funnier than someone treating impending disaster as if it's routine. The anticipation builds naturally because the audience is allowed to imagine the possible consequences while you remain blissfully unaware. Confidence at this stage is a double-edged sword. On one side, it allows you to believe you're capable. On the other, it sets up the contrast that makes the eventual chaos even more absurd. You're describing a scenario that is mundane, but the hooks come from the internal monologue, the imagined grandeur of your success, the growing tension between expectation and reality. You picture yourself plating the food beautifully, sipping wine, maybe even receiving applause from your spouse. All of these imagined moments heighten the stakes because you've made success seem both inevitable and fragile. The audience knows exactly how quickly that illusion will crumble. What really lands this part of the story is the pacing. The slow build-up, the detailed description of your prep work, the confidence in small victories, all create a comedic rhythm. Each chopped vegetable, each stir of the sauce, is a beat in the narrative that increases tension. The humor is subtle but effective. You're not screaming about failure yet. You're calmly, methodically walking toward it. Taking ordinary events, dry observation and self-deprecation, and letting the audience see disaster creeping up one tiny step at a time. The hooks are layered. Your optimism, your exaggeration of skill, and the audience's anticipation all collide to make the very start of the story engaging, relatable, and funny. As I continued with my dinner experiment, the calm before disaster felt almost cinematic. Everything was going well, or at least it seemed that way. I was chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, occasionally glancing at the recipe like a responsible adult, imagining the final product as if it were already plated beautifully. That's the hook right there. The audience can see that nothing is as under control as it appears. The suspense builds because the mundane actions, turning on the stove, adding oil to the pan, tossing ingredients, are described in a way that makes them feel almost ritualistic. Each step is a prelude to some inevitable catastrophe. In Nate Bargatze's style, you keep it slow, dry, and observational, letting the audience lean forward because they know disaster is coming, even if the protagonist hasn't realized it yet. The tension escalates naturally as you narrate the subtle signs of trouble. Maybe the pan starts to smoke slightly. There's a small sizzle that seems louder than it should be. You shrug it off thinking, that's normal. That's part of the cooking process. But the audience knows that tiny hints like this are never normal. They're the comedic warning lights that something is about to go horribly wrong. The beauty of this stage is how ordinary it all is, yet every action feels monumental. Stirring a sauce becomes dramatic, adding spices becomes suspenseful, and flipping a vegetable feels like diffusing a bomb. The humor comes from exaggerating these simple actions in a calm, matter-of-fact tone, which makes the eventual chaos hit even harder. Your internal monologue during this calm phase is crucial for engagement. You're narrating your confidence, perhaps saying things like, I got this. This is fine. Maybe I'm a natural at this. The audience recognizes the classic overconfidence trap. They are already anticipating the fall. You can describe yourself moving smoothly, chopping vegetables with precision, glancing over at the timer and feeling that sense of victory, all while the smoke quietly begins to curl up from the pan. The subtle irony is what creates the hook, narrating a triumph that the audience knows is about to collapse in spectacular fashion. It's the slow, dry buildup that makes the chaos that follows not just funny, but inevitable. There's also the charm in how you interact with the tools of cooking. You handle the pan like it's a fragile instrument, check the lid multiple times, maybe even talk to the stove like it understands the stakes. The audience finds humor in these humanized interactions because they are exaggerations of normal cooking behavior. You're calm, measured, and yet the very actions you take are inadvertently preparing for disaster. The tension between your serene confidence and the potential for chaos keeps viewers engaged and invested in what happens next. Even small visual cues, like a glimmer of smoke or a slight flicker of flame, become comedic anchors. The audience's eyes are drawn to these details because they signal the turning point without anything being overtly dramatic yet. You can describe how the pan sizzles more aggressively, the aroma changes, and maybe your eyebrows knit together slightly. All while you tell yourself that everything is fine. The hook is in that tension, the calm before the storm, where every ordinary action is amplified by anticipation. The audience is waiting, laughing quietly, knowing exactly how wrong it's about to go. Then comes the part that really amplifies the comedy, the reactions of everyone else in the house. My wife walked in, perfectly calm, like she had no idea a minor apocalypse was happening in our kitchen. That contrast is gold. She looks at me, tilts her head slightly, and says something simple like, "Are you okay?" Which, in Nate Bargatze's style, is hilarious because it's understated, but hits like a punchline. The hook is in that juxtaposition. I'm standing there, smoke curling around me, waving a pan like a flag of surrender, and she's calm, collecting herself like none of this is even remotely dramatic. It's the perfect foil because the audience immediately recognizes themselves in her position. They've been the calm observer in a minor disaster while someone else flails. It's universally relatable. Her reaction sets the stage for observational comedy about family dynamics and human behavior. Maybe she offers advice in a slow, deliberate voice, or maybe she doesn't even acknowledge the flames at first, which makes my internal panic feel even more absurd. You begin narrating your thoughts. She's treating this like a normal Tuesday. Why is she not screaming? Why is she not helping? Does she not understand I am moments from burning the house down? The humor lies in the contrast between my frantic internal monologue and her calm, measured exterior. Every gesture she makes, whether it's a casual sip of water or a raised eyebrow, becomes a comedic anchor that enhances the tension and the absurdity of the situation. A child into the mix escalates the comedy even further. Kids have this brutally honest perspective. Maybe my daughter walks in, sees the smoke, and asks something like, "F Dade, why is the kitchen on fire?" The simplicity and innocence of the question is a perfect punchline because it cuts through my overcomplicated panic. The audience laughs not only at my failure, but also at the human tendency to explain chaos in the most straightforward way possible. The child's honesty becomes a comedic device, reflecting the truth that we often complicate situations unnecessarily while others see them plainly. The timing of reactions is key. Nate's style thrives on pauses, subtle expressions, and deadpan observation. I might flail briefly with a towel. The flames lick the ceiling, and all the while she stands silently, hands on hips, waiting for me to figure it out. Tension builds because the audience is aware of the impending resolution, but the characters remain calm or oblivious, heightening the absurdity. The hook here is that the more calm the observers are, the funnier the chaos becomes. Every small glance, tilt of the head, or delayed reaction creates layers of comedy that feel natural yet expertly timed. Visual cues in storytelling enhance the humor too. You describe the smoke curling, the pan blackened, the charred vegetables, the towels dangerously close to flames, all while narrating your own helplessness. Each element is like a comedic prop, allowing the audience to picture the disaster clearly while laughing at my attempts to maintain composure. The family reactions turn ordinary failure into a rich, layered comedy scene where every glance, word, silence contributes to the hilarity. The hooks are everywhere: subtle judgment, innocent, honesty, perfect timing. The stark contrast between calm and panic, making this part of the story both engaging and irresistibly funny. The funniest part of the story begins when I start to reflect on my own complete incompetence in the kitchen. By this point, the flames are under control, or at least contained, and the smoke alarm is wailing like it's judging every life decision I've ever made. That's where the humor intensifies. Instead of panicking, I start thinking about how ridiculous I must look. My hands are covered in oil. My hair is sticking up as if I've been electrocuted. I'm holding a burnt spatula like it's a weapon I've barely mastered. The hook here is that self-awareness in Nate. The audience sees the disaster unfolding, but the humor comes from the calm, dry narration of your own failures. You're not screaming or exaggerating, you're just quietly admitting, I tried. I failed spectacularly. As I narrate my fumbling attempts to salvage the dinner, every small action becomes funnier than the last. I might try to stir the charred vegetables, only to realize they've turned into something unrecognizable, and I mutter under my breath, well, that's fine. It's supposed to be crunchy. The audience connects with that because they've all had moments when a simple task spirals out of control. Your own attempt to rationalize it makes it even more absurd. Each minor failure compounds, building tension and ladders simultaneously. The hooks are in the detailed observations, the sound of sizzling, the lingering smoke, the charred aroma. It's all exaggerated, just enough to be relatable, but ridiculous enough to be funny. Family reactions continue to enhance the comedy. My wife, still calm, hands me a glass of wine as if everything is perfectly normal. My daughter gives a look that clearly says, "You are hopeless." The contrast between their composed demeanor and my complete disarray is comedic gold. The audience sees this duality, the chaos and the calm, and laughs because it mirrors real-life family dynamics. Add hooks through these interactions because each glance, eyebrow raise, sarcastic comment serves as a comedic punctuation to my internal monologue of panic and disbelief. The humor deepens when I start reflecting on how overconfidence led me here. I think back to my initial excitement, imagining myself as a competent adult who could cook a gourmet meal. The irony is palpable. The very confidence that inspired me to step into the kitchen is what ensured my spectacular failure. The audience laughs because they can predict the outcome, They see the pattern, the inevitability. It makes the storytelling richer. In true Nate Bargatze fashion, the self-deprecation is understated yet sharp, letting viewers enjoy both the narrative and the relatability. Even the mundane details become comedic elements. The burned pan, the spilled oil, the scattered utensils, they're props in the story, each with a punchline waiting to be delivered. Describing my slow motion reactions to each new misstep keeps the audience hooked because they are witnessing a chain reaction of errors narrated with calm absurdity. The hooks here are layered: reflection on failure, family as the foil, ironic self-awareness, and observational humor, all combining to make the disaster not only funny but memorable. By the time I sit down and finally accept defeat, the humor has shifted from chaotic physical comedy to reflective, deadpan storytelling. The audience is laughing not just at the fire or the burnt food, but at the way I calmly narrate the absurdity of my ambition and failure. The hooks in this segment are subtle yet powerful. Self-deprecation, ironic reflection, and relatable overconfidence that leads to spectacular collapse, which keeps viewers engaged and laughing throughout. The final part of the story hits when you fully embrace the anticlimax, the moment where all pretense of control has vanished and you're left with nothing but the aftermath of your own disaster. After the fire is out, the vegetables are unrecognizable, the pan is ruined, and the smoke detector continues its solo performance. I sit back and quietly assess the situation. This reflection is where the humor lands hardest because it's delivered in that calm, observational Nate Bargatze tone. You're not panicking, you're just narrating a spectacular failure. The audience laughs because they've been along for the build up, the confidence, the slow escalation, the fire, and now they get to watch the protagonist fully realize the absurdity of it all. The hook is in the juxtaposition. A major disaster has occurred, but the delivery is understated, making it both relatable and hilarious. Part of what makes this moment so engaging is the inner monologue. I begin thinking about the ambition that led me here, recalling how I believed a few YouTube tutorials and some optimism were enough to make me a competent chef. That confidence feels foolish in hindsight, and that self-awareness creates a rich comedic moment. I describe my attempts to save dinner, the fumbling with utensils, and the half-hearted movements to salvage anything edible, all while acknowledging the sheer improbability of success. The audience laughs not at the chaos itself, but at the calm, almost resigned narration of it. The hooks are subtle yet effective, reflecting on overconfidence, embracing failure, narrating disaster in a way that amplifies humor through understatement. Family reactions continue to provide comedic contrast. My wife and daughter observe the aftermath, still calm and perfectly composed, which heightens the absurdity of my condition. The humor comes from my perspective. I see panic, disarray, and failure everywhere, but the family's reactions are minimal, almost judgmental in their subtlety. The audience connects with this because they've all experienced that dynamic, being the person flailing while others watch calmly, silently noting every misstep. The hooks in this segment rely on contrast, chaotic internal experience versus serene external observation, which keeps viewers both engaged and laughing. The humor also comes from the absurdity of trying to rationalize the situation. I narrate thoughts like, well, at least the fire is out. Maybe I can salvage something. Maybe we'll call it charred gourmet. These dry, understated comments highlight the ridiculousness of trying to impose logic on a completely illogical situation. The audience laughs because they recognize the futility. The tension between expectation and reality provides a perfect comedic payoff. Every small detail, the blackened pan, the lingering smoke, the scattered utensils, becomes a prop in this narrative, turning disaster into a carefully observed comedy scene. Finally, the story lands with a humorous surrender. Acknowledge my limitations, accept defeat, and reach for the one solution that guarantees safety, sanity, and peace: ordering pizza. This anticlimactic resolution is classic Nate Bargatze, where the punchline is not a dramatic disaster, but a calm, relatable choice after a series of misadventures. The hooks are layered-dyed self-deprecation, understated reflection, family as a comedic foil, and the universal recognition that some battles are simply not worth fighting. The audience is left laughing at both the chaos and the protagonist's quiet acceptance, which makes this ending simultaneously satisfying, relatable, and hilarious. That's when I realized some things in life are better left untested, like my ability to cook dinner. You can watch all the tutorials, read all the recipes, and still end up with smoke, fire, a pan that's never going to forgive you. So now, whenever I feel ambitious, I just order pizza and call it a night. Because some battles, like trying to be a gourmet chef in your own kitchen, aren't worth fighting. And honestly, the only thing I mastered that night was how to survive a culinary disaster with a sense of humor intact. So, have you ever had that moment in marriage where your wife says something that sounds amazing, but really it's a trap? Yeah, mine said, do whatever you want. At first, I thought, finally, freedom! Then I noticed the way she was looking at me. And that's when I realized freedom is terrifying. Because when your wife says, do whatever you want, it's not about choice, it's about survival. Every decision you make suddenly feels like a high-stakes mission. Should I pick the blue towels? Should I clean the garage? Should I breathe? Every move is being silently judged. Marriage is like a motivational boot camp disguised as love. You learn patience, emotional intelligence, and how to survive awkward situations without losing your sense of humor. You realize the little things like saying, yes, honey, can actually change the course of the week. And if you can laugh at yourself along the way, you discover that life isn't about winning arguments. It's about surviving them gracefully, learning a little humility, and finding joy in the chaos. By the end of this speech, you'll understand that sometimes the most powerful lessons in life come disguised as one simple, terrifying sentence. Do whatever you want. Do whatever you want. Those words sound harmless until you realize they're actually a high-stakes test disguised as freedom. You hear them and think, finally, I can do anything. You picture yourself making bold decisions, taking control, maybe even winning a small victory in the domestic battlefield. Then you notice the way she's looking at you, calm, quiet, but sharp, and suddenly confidence leaves the room faster than you can say, I've got this. Every choice you make becomes a gamble. Should I pick the blue towels or the gray ones? Should I fix the leaky faucet now or later? Should I even touch the thermostat? Each decision carries the invisible weight of silent judgment, and every move feels like walking on a tightrope over a pit of lava. You start second-guessing yourself, recalling tiny mistakes from last week, last month, even last year, all of which you thought were long forgotten. And the kicker, the more you try to rationalize your choices, the more you realize logic has left the building. This is the ultimate test of patience, humility, and self-control, and if you survive it with a sense of humor intact, you've just earned a PhD in marriage navigation. Confidence is a tricky thing. One minute you feel like a master of your own life, walking around like everything is under control, and the next minute it evaporates the second your wife raises an eyebrow. Just one eyebrow, perfectly arched, silently scanning you. And suddenly every decision you've ever made comes into question. Did I lock the door? Did I take out the trash? Did I somehow forget to mention the thing I said 3 weeks ago? That single look communicates more than words ever could. It's like a silent spotlight shining on your mistakes, your oversights, and every little misstep you've tried to ignore. You begin to realize that confidence isn't something you can fake when someone has perfected the art of subtle judgment. And the funny part is, the look doesn't even need to last long. Just a flash, and it's enough to make you question every choice you've made that day. You start talking to yourself in whispers, pacing slightly, thinking, maybe if I just nod, everything will be fine. It's the ultimate test of self-awareness, patience, and oddly enough, humor. Because the only way to survive that look is to laugh at how completely powerless you suddenly feel. Silent judgment is one of the most powerful, underestimated forces in marriage. You walk into a room thinking everything is fine, only to feel it, the unspoken critique hovering over every action you take. It doesn't come with a loud voice or a dramatic decoration. It's subtle, quiet, almost invisible, but it speaks volumes. One crossed arm, a slight tilt of the head, a tiny sigh, and suddenly you're analyzing every word you've ever said, every small mistake you've made, and every future decision you're about to make. The trick is learning how to read it without panicking, to recognize the cues before they escalate into frustration or tension. You start noticing patterns, the soft glance, the subtle pause, the almost imperceptible frown. You begin to understand that marriage isn't just about conversation, it's about observation, empathy, and timing. You develop a mental radar, a skill that allows you to navigate tricky moments with grace and humor. And the best part, once you master the art of reading silent judgment, you start turning potential conflict into connection, realizing that understanding the unspoken is more valuable than winning any argument. Being right feels amazing at first. You make your point, you present your evidence, and for a few glorious minutes, you feel like the smartest person in the room. You might even lean back, chest out, thinking, finally, someone sees it my way. But then comes bedtime, and suddenly all that confidence you built evaporates. Because when the lights go down, the arguments don't disappear. They just sit there quietly, waiting for you to reflect on them. You realize that logic and facts mean very little when emotions are involved. That triumphant moment of being right feels hollow when your spouse is silently remembering everything you could have done differently, everything you've said, and every tiny flaw that suddenly seems enormous in the darkness. You start wondering if winning an argument is really worth the tension, the awkward silences, or the mental energy spent replaying your victory. And the kicker, the more you try to rationalize your correctness, the more you realize that marriage isn't about proving a point, it's about surviving, growing, and finding peace. Being right might feel good in daylight, but at night, it's humility, patience, and humor that actually carry you through. Some arguments in marriage aren't meant to be won. They're meant to teach you patience. You walk in thinking, maybe I can make my point, but the moment she opens her mouth, you know you've already lost. And losing doesn't feel great, at least not in the beginning. But if you pay attention, it's actually a masterclass in self-control. You start learning how to pause before reacting, how to listen without interrupting, and how to choose your words carefully. You realize that yelling or over-explaining won't change anything. It only escalates the tension. Patience becomes your secret weapon. You begin practicing it everywhere, nodding, smiling, and sometimes even pretending you understand when you really don't. Over time, you notice something funny. Losing gracefully actually earns you more peace than winning ever did. You also start understanding that patience isn't passive. It's an active skill that allows you to navigate emotions, avoid unnecessary conflict, and create harmony. And the most surprising lesson, the more arguments you lose, the more resilient, self-aware, and emotionally intelligent you become. Learning to survive marriage's small battles with humor, humility, and quiet confidence. Humor is like a hidden superpower in marriage that most people underestimate. You can forget an anniversary, leave the lights on, or misplace the grocery list, and suddenly everything could spiral into tension. But a well-timed joke changes the entire mood. It's not about being a stand-up comedian. It's about using laughter as a bridge to diffuse stress and create connection. For example, when I accidentally ruined dinner, instead of panicking, I made a small joke about our gourmet disaster. And just like that, the tension melted. Humor turns mistakes into stories, arguments into lessons, and awkward silences into shared laughter. You begin to realize that humor isn't just funny, it's practical. It protects relationships from unnecessary conflict, builds patience, and reminds both people that perfection isn't the goal. The key is timings. Say the right thing at the right moment, and suddenly a potential battle becomes a memory you'll laugh about later. Over time, you learn to see humor in the everyday chaos, the minor failures, and the unpredictable moments, and you discover that marriage isn't about being flawless. It's about surviving together with laughter, grace, and a little clever wit. Marriage is probably the most intense emotional intelligence training you'll ever get without even realizing it. One moment you're confident, thinking you have everything under control, and the next you're trying to decode moods, tone, and subtle gestures that could mean almost anything. You start noticing tiny signals, the way she pauses before speaking, the tilt of her head, the quiet sigh that says, "Pay attention," and suddenly you understand that words are only part of communication. Emotional intelligence in marriage isn't about knowing all the answers, it's about sensing emotions, responding thoughtfully, and managing your own reactions. You begin to realize that listening can be more powerful than speaking, that empathy can prevent arguments, and that timing is everything when delivering even the smallest comment. You practice patience and self-control, learning to choose your words wisely and understand your spouse's perspective, sometimes before they even say it out loud. Marriage forces you to read situations like a book, anticipate moods, and navigate delicate moments with subtlety, humor, and grace. Over time, you discover that mastering emotional intelligence isn't theoretical. It's earned in every conversation, every silent glance, and every shared laugh. There's a phrase in marriage more powerful than any motivational quote, life hack, or negotiation tactic, and it's just 3 words. Yes, honey. You say it at the right moment, and suddenly tension evaporates, conflicts shrink, and your week feels manageable again. It doesn't even matter if you actually agree with what was said. The magic lies in acknowledging your partner, validating their perspective, and keeping the peace. Timing is everything. You can't wait until the argument escalates. It has to be said before the silent judgment builds. Sometimes you add a smile, a nod, or a little humor, and suddenly you've turned a potential disaster into a peaceful moment. It's a simple practice that trains patience, emotional awareness, and humility, teaching you that not every point needs to be argued, not every idea needs to be challenged, and not every detail requires correction. Over time, yes, honey becomes more than words. It's a survival skill, a secret weapon, and a reminder that marriage is about partnership, compromise, and shared peace. And the funny part is, the phrase doesn't just save the week, it quietly strengthens relationships, builds trust, and often turns small challenges into laughter. Filled memories. Mistakes in marriage are inevitable. You'll spill coffee, leave the lights on, forget a grocery item, or accidentally insult a favorite shirt, and in any other scenario, these would be minor annoyances, but in marriage, they have the potential to escalate quickly. The key is learning how to turn those moments into laughter instead of tension. Humor works like a reset button, diffusing stress, creating connection, and reminding both people that perfection isn't the goal. For example, when I once dropped an entire plate of spaghetti, I didn't panic. I made a small joke about our abstract art dinner, and suddenly the disaster became a story we still laugh about. Over time, you start seeing mistakes as opportunities to lighten the mood, strengthen bonds, and practice patience and humility. Humor doesn't just mask mistakes, it reframes them, transforming frustration into shared amusement and turning awkward moments into stories worth retelling. You learn to approach mishaps creatively, to inject levity when things go wrong, and to protect relationships from unnecessary conflict. And the surprising lesson is that the more you embrace humor and mistakes, the easier it becomes to navigate everyday challenges while keeping love, respect, and laughter alive. Marriage teaches you that sometimes the strongest move isn't being right, it's letting it go. Pride feels good in the moment. You win the argument, prove your point, and for a fleeting second, you feel like a genius. Then you realize that the victory doesn't matter nearly as much as the peace that comes from surrendering the ego. Choosing peace over pride is subtle, almost invisible, but its power is immense. You start noticing small moments where saying, "You're right," or "It's fine," prevents tension from escalating, preserves harmony, and saves mental energy for more important battles. Over time, you see that this isn't weakness, it's strategy. It's a quiet, deliberate choice to prioritize the relationship over being technically correct. You learn to pause, listen, and respond with thoughtfulness instead of defensiveness. You notice how much calmer the home feels when conflicts are avoided or softened, and how much happier everyone is when laughter replaces criticism. Choosing peace over pride slowly becomes a habit, a skill, and a secret strength, teaching patience, empathy, and emotional intelligence. And eventually, you realize that humility doesn't diminish your value, it enhances it, and it makes everyday life in marriage smoother, lighter, and far more enjoyable. So, the moral of the story is, when your wife says, "Do whatever you want," it's not permission, it's a test of patience, humor, and emotional intelligence. Marriage isn't about winning arguments, being right, or even making perfect decisions. It's about surviving the tricky moments, laughing at your mistakes, and learning to navigate life together with a little humility and a lot of humor. The smartest move isn't the clever comeback or the perfectly argued point. It's knowing when to nod, say, "Yes, honey," and maybe make a joke before it all blows up. Because in the end, marriage is less about control and more about connection. And if you can survive the week without a major disaster while keeping your sense of humor intact, well, you've basically already won. So I decided one day that I was going to become one of those people, the ones who wake up early, full of energy, ready to conquer the world. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. thinking, this is it. Today I become productive. Today I will change my life. And for about 2 minutes after the alarm went off, I actually believed it. I stretched, I yawned, even looked out the window like I was auditioning for a motivational video. Then reality hit me like a cold shower. The sun wasn't even up yet. The birds hadn't started singing, and my brain immediately said, "Nate, you don't belong here. Go back to bed." And that's the hook right away. The universe is reminding me that early mornings are a cruel joke. I roll out of bed anyway, trying to pretend I'm a functional human being. I stumble into the kitchen, pour some coffee. It's already too hot, too bitter, too much everything about it is wrong. And I realize in that moment that early risers make no sense. They wake up at this hour smiling, cheerful, like they're auditioning for sainthood. I'm over here negotiating with a mug of coffee like it owes me an apology. That's the hook. The absurd contrast between their energy and my zombie-level existence is comedy gold. Then comes the disaster part, because trying to be an early riser is like asking a cat to swim. I try to make breakfast, which turns into a small kitchen apocalypse. Toast burns, coffee spills, I almost fall asleep standing up. And somehow, that mess, I look around and think, yeah, this is not how humans are supposed to function before 7 a.m. And the hook works again. The more you try to be productive early, the more life conspires against you, turning a simple morning into a series of little catastrophes that feel like they're written by a sitcom writer. The conversations that happen during early mornings are the best. Someone might ask, "Don't you love mornings?" And I stare at them like they've just asked me to fight a bear with my bare hands. I nod. I mumble something vague, but inside I'm screaming, "No, I don't love mornings. Mornings are a form of cruel punishment." Nate-style humor shines here because it's the universal frustration. Everyone knows someone who thrives at sunrise, and the rest of us are just trying to survive until noon. By the end of the morning, disaster is complete. I'm messy, caffeinated, but still groggy and somehow awake. I look at the early risers and think, you're amazing. and also terrifying. I'm never doing this again. And that's the closing hook admiration mixed with relief that you can go back to your normal, slightly lazy routine tomorrow, coffee in hand, embracing the fact that mornings are officially someone else's problem, not yours. I set my alarm with the absolute best intentions, the kind of intentions that make you feel like a motivational poster come to life. Told myself, today is the day. You're going to be one of those people who wake up early, smiling, productive, ready to conquer the world. For the first 30 seconds after that alarm went off, I genuinely believed it. I even sat up in bed, stretching like I was auditioning for a yoga commercial, and thought, this is going to be great. I feel amazing. But then reality hit me like a brick disguised as a rooster. The sun wasn't even up yet. My brain was still negotiating with my body, and every muscle in me was saying, Nate, this is a mistake. The hook here is immediate because anyone who's ever tried to wake up early knows exactly that internal struggle. It's like your body is staging a full-scale protest against productivity, and it's not taking prisoners. So there I was, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to reason with my own limbs. Figured I could trick myself with small wins, so I decided to stand up. Lasted about 10 steps before I nearly tripped over the carpet and realized that gravity is extra cruel at 6 a.m. The hook lands again because it's absurd. Humans are attempting to function at a time when evolution never intended them to. Tried to sip coffee while standing, a move that looked elegant in my imagination, but in reality felt like performing a delicate balancing act on a tightrope. That's when I realized early risers must have some secret mutation, some hidden superpower, because surviving these first moments of the day without chaos is completely beyond normal human capability. Then there's the internal dialogue, the relentless commentary from your own brain that makes you question every life decision. Why are you doing this? Did you even sleep enough? Is this coffee going to help or betray you? Maybe naps should be mandatory before sunrise. The comedy lies in the exaggerated seriousness of the struggle. The hook works because everyone who has attempted early rising can relate. They've had a conversation with themselves that makes them question reality, morality, and the very existence of mornings. Even getting out of the bedroom becomes a negotiation. You have to convince your body that movement is necessary despite the betrayal of every joint, muscle, and cell in your system. Every step is a minor victory. Every sip of coffee a strategic gain in the war against the early morning. The hook hits again because it's universal. The more you try to act like a human in the morning, the more ridiculous it feels. And of course, somewhere in this process, you glance out the window and see early risers jogging, smiling, radiating health and happiness, and your brain mutters, "This is black magic. There is no other explanation." By the time you finally make it to the kitchen, fully awake in body but still negotiating with your brain for sanity, the absurdity of the entire endeavor becomes painfully funny. You start to appreciate the comedy of attempting something so simple yet so impossibly difficult. The hook is in the relatability. Anyone who has faced the cruel tyranny of an alarm clock knows this struggle. This tiny war waged every morning against your own body. And it's hilarious because it's entirely inevitable. Once I managed to drag myself out of bed, the real challenge began, navigating the world while only half awake. Everything about the morning feels surreal. You've been dropped into a parallel universe where everyone else is functioning at 100%, and you're still negotiating with gravity. Your legs feel like they belong to someone else. Your eyes refuse to focus properly. The simplest tasks, like walking to the kitchen, become a comedy of errors. The hook hits immediately because anyone who's ever attempted to rise before sunrise knows exactly how absurdly difficult it is to exist at that hour. It's not just waking up, it's a full body negotiation, treaty with yourself that may or may not survive the next 15 minutes. Then comes the coffee dilemma, which is an early riser's greatest tool and a late riser's lifeline. You try to pour it, only to realize that even this seemingly simple act requires precision and focus that your body refuses to provide. You spill a little, you curse softly, you wobble, and somehow the whole process feels like a performance, art, piece, and chaos. The subtle humor of the hook is in the contrast. Early risers make this look effortless, as if they've been born to operate at this ungodly hour, while you're over here negotiating with every ounce of your being just to survive. And of course, the coffee itself never tastes quite right. It's either too hot or not hot enough, too strong or too weak, as if the universe is mocking your attempt at being functional. Walking through the house, everything seems exaggerated. The floorboards creak too loudly, the fridge hums ominously, even the sunlight creeping through the window feels like an invasive interrogation. You're trying to exist quietly, but the world seems determined to remind you that mornings are not meant for creatures like you. The hook works again because the absurdity is universal. Night owls everywhere recognize the feeling of being out of sync with a world that expects cheerfulness and productivity before 7 a.m. Observing early risers during this process is both impressive and terrifying. They're stretching, smiling, chatting, performing what looks like an intricate ritual of human excellence. You're wobbling around like a confused raccoon forced into daylight. The comedy comes from the contrast. Their energy highlights your own struggles, creating a natural tension that is inherently funny. The hook lands because anyone watching can instantly relate to this dynamic, this mix of envy, admiration, self-deprecation that comes with witnessing someone function so well at an hour designed for suffering. The mundane tasks of the morning take on absurd proportions. Pouring cereal, putting on clothes, brushing teeth all become little battles between coordination and exhaustion. You try to multitask, thinking, I can do this. An early riser now, only to fail spectacularly in ways that feel both humiliating and hilarious. Style humor shines here because the audience sees themselves in every minor disaster, exaggerated struggle that comes with waking up too early. And through it all, the internal monologue is relentless. Why am I doing this? Should I go back to bed? Is anyone else this tired? How are these people so happy? It's a constant negotiation, a mix of panic, frustration, humor that turns the simple act of existing in the morning into an epic saga. The hook, the exaggerated absurdity of early mornings, for anyone not naturally inclined to them, keeps the audience laughing and entirely engaged in the chaos of being awake before sunrise. Once you finally reach the kitchen, the chaos truly begins. You think making breakfast is simple toast, coffee, maybe some egg, but early mornings have a way of turning the ordinary into a small disaster zone. The hook hits immediately because anyone who's attempted to function before the sun knows that the simplest tasks become nearly impossible. Toast burns in ways that feel personal. Coffee spills in slow motion, as if mocking your ambition. Somehow, every utensil in the house conspires to make you question your life choices. Style observational humor thrives here because the audience recognizes that tiny everyday disasters become infinitely funnier when your body isn't fully awake. Even pouring cereal feels like an extreme sport. You aim for the bowl, but the box is heavier than it looks. The cereal jumps like it's alive, and before you know it, a cloud of flakes is on the counter floor, and occasionally your shirt. The hook works because everyone has had at least one of these mornings where minor mistakes feel like a catastrophic failure. You try to recover, muttered under your breath, "I can handle this. I am functioning." Adult. But the universe has other plans. Every drop of coffee or flake of cereal becomes a comedic symbol of your early morning suffering. Watching early risers handle the same kitchen tasks is almost cruelly entertaining. They pour their coffee gracefully. Toast is perfectly browned, and somehow they manage to eat breakfast while checking emails and journaling. The contrast is the hook. Their effortless perfection highlights your own chaos, creating a perfect comedic tension. Style humor emphasizes that this is relatable and ridiculous. There's nothing inherently wrong with you. The problem is simply the hour. Everyone watching can instantly sympathize with the struggle of attempting normal human behavior while still half asleep. As you attempt to salvage the situation, you begin to notice little absurdities that are too funny not to remark on. The toast pops up violently, like it's trying to escape. The milk is slightly too warm because you forgot to refrigerate it properly the night before. Your coffee mug seems to have an attitude. Every small failure is exaggerated in your mind, which is exactly what makes it comedic. The hook works here because it magnifies the tension between your intentions and reality. The more you care about doing it right, the more the morning conspires against you. Even simple gestures like stirring coffee or buttering toast become exercises in patience and coordination. You realize early risers have some kind of superhuman ability to do everything smoothly while the rest of us are wobbling through life in pajamas. The audience laughs because they see themselves in every exaggerated stumble, every frustrated sigh, and every moment of mild panic. The hook is, in the universality of the experience. Everyone has been there. Everyone has felt it. The comedy comes from exaggerating it just enough to be both relatable and absurd. And somehow, amidst all this small-scale destruction, you can't help but admire the people who thrive in the morning. Their energy, precision, and cheerfulness are almost supernatural, and watching them makes your own struggles feel even funnier. Style storytelling turns these minor disasters into a narrative that is equal parts self-deprecation, envy, and comedy. The hook, the mix of chaos, observation, and relatability, keeps the audience hooked because it's not just about making breakfast. It's about surviving the morning while the world expects you to perform like a functioning adult. As the morning progresses, the real challenge becomes observing early risers in their natural habitat, which is both fascinating and terrifying at the same time. You watch them stretch, sip coffee, move with a rhythm that seems almost choreographed, and you can't help but compare yourself to this impossible standard. The hook lands immediately because the contrast is absurd. You're shuffling around like a confused zombie while they seem to exist on a completely different level of human functionality. Style humor thrives here, emphasizing that the sheer energy and organization of early risers is as funny as it is intimidating. Every small action they perform seems effortless, from making breakfast to checking emails and planning their day, only amplifies your own struggles. You attempt a task pouring coffee, loading the dishwasher, tying your shoes, and it somehow goes wrong in the most minor yet comical ways. The audience recognizes the exaggeration, which makes the humor both relatable and engaging. The hook is universal. Anyone who has tried to be productive early knows the mix of admiration, envy, self-deprecating laughter that comes with seeing someone thrive while you're barely functioning. Even conversations with early risers are a minefield for comedy. They ask cheerful questions like, "Don't you love mornings?" And you're forced to respond with vague positivity while internally screaming, "Oh no! Mornings are cruel. This is torture." The humor lies in the tension between social politeness and private despair. The hook is in the universality of this experience. Everyone watching has either asked or been asked this question. The awkwardness is instantly relatable. Nate-style storytelling takes these moments and amplifies them into comedic gold by focusing on the internal monologue and subtle exaggeration of reactions. There's also something subtly terrifying about the confidence early risers exude. They genuinely believe that mornings are magical, productive, and life-changing, while you're still negotiating with your pillow and questioning why sunlight exists. The hook here is in the absurdity. The world feels calibrated to reward morning people. Observing them highlights your own laziness in a humorous way. The audience can't help but laugh at the exaggeration of the early riser's perfection, simultaneously admiring them from a safe distance. Small routines that they perform flawlessly become comedy fodder for storytelling. Pouring a cup of coffee, making breakfast, checking a do list is elevated into a spectacle when contrasted with your own fumbling, half-asleep attempts. Each minor failure is a punchline. Each successful action of theirs is a setup, and they're smart. And the hook keeps the audience by drawing them into the shared experience of struggling to function early in the morning. By observing early risers, you start to notice the little things that make their mornings so absurdly impressive. The way they stretch without complaint, sip coffee without spilling, and handle minor crises with calm efficiency. The humor comes from your exaggerated perspective. Their excellence makes your fumbling attempts all the more ridiculous. Nate-style storytelling focuses on these contrasts, turning a simple morning into a narrative of chaos, admiration, and laughter. The hook, the mix of awe, envy, hilarity keeps the audience engaged because it is both relatable and exaggerated in exactly the right way for comedy. Once you start interacting with early risers, the comedy of the morning escalates in ways that are both hilarious and relatable. They have this uncanny ability to ask questions that sound innocent but are loaded with judgment, like, "Don't you love mornings?" And immediately, your brain starts running through all the socially acceptable answers while also silently screaming, "No, mornings are a cruel invention designed to make night owls feel inadequate." The hook lands instantly because anyone who has ever been confronted with cheerful morning enthusiasts knows that awkward tension between politeness and internal panic. Style humor thrives on this mix of social discomfort and exaggerated internal reaction, turning a small interaction into comedic gold. As the conversation continues, you notice the subtle, almost sinister confidence of early risers. They float through the morning with purpose and joy, sipping coffee, stretching, occasionally offering unsolicited tips about productivity. Each word, each gesture becomes a comedic contrast to your groggy, fumbling attempts at basic survival. The audience laughs because they recognize themselves in the struggle trying to maintain dignity while being mentally attacked by someone thriving at an hour your body is still rejecting. The hook is in the absurdity. How can someone function so cheerfully when your own existence feels like a minor disaster? Even the simplest suggestions from early risers, like, "You should try journaling in the morning," hit differently when you're still half asleep. Style storytelling turns this into an exaggerated mental debate. Should you pretend interest, not politely, scream internally about the injustice of mornings? The humor comes from the relatable panic, the contrast between calm efficiency and groggy chaos, and the way your brain dramatizes these tiny encounters. The hook works because the audience immediately connects with the universal struggle of navigating conversations with people whose natural rhythm makes you feel like a malfunctioning robot. Early risers also unintentionally highlight your own failures in hilarious ways. Watching them make breakfast gracefully, sip coffee without spilling, or stretch without collapsing makes your own clumsiness feel even more absurd. You try to emulate them for a moment, attempting a yoga pose or perfectly timed sip of coffee, only to fail spectacularly. The audience laughs because they see themselves in your attempts and failures, and the hook keeps them engaged. The tension between admiration, envy, and self-deprecation is inherently funny. Throughout all of this, internal commentary adds layers to the comedy. You analyze every gesture, overthink every word, exaggerate every minor mistake into a full-blown calamity. Nate-style humor thrives in these observations, turning ordinary interactions into a narrative that's both relatable and absurdly funny. The hook here is subtle but powerful. The more you overanalyze and dramatize the small details, the funnier the story becomes. The audience can't help but keep watching to see what disaster, awkward moment, or ridiculous observation will come next. By the time you've endured these early morning conversations, you're exhausted, caffeinated, and slightly traumatized, but also laughing at yourself and the absurdity of the situation. The early risers, blissfully unaware of the chaos they inspire, continue their routines while you navigate the morning in survival mode. Style storytelling uses these exaggerated contrasts to create a humorous narrative that's both relatable and highly engaging. The hook, the mix of awkward social interaction, envy, comedic self-reflection keeps the audience invested because everyone has faced this struggle. Seeing it dramatized makes it endlessly entertaining. By the time the morning has fully unfolded, you find yourself reflecting on the absurdity of everything you just survived. There's a moment when you pause, coffee in hand, slightly jittery, realizing that you actually made it this far without completely collapsing, spilling everything, accidentally setting something on fire. Style, humor thrives in these observations because the audience recognizes the mix of relief, minor triumph, lingering chaos that defines early mornings for night owls. The hook lands instantly because anyone who has struggled to wake up early knows the feeling of surviving a tiny war against your own body and the world around you. As you glance around, you notice the early risers still functioning with supernatural calmness. They're checking their schedules, stretching, sipping coffee, and even smiling. The contrast is striking. They appear like human superheroes while you're trying to celebrate the small victories of standing upright and not spilling cereal. The comedy comes from this exaggerated contrast, and the hook works because everyone watching has experienced the combination of awe and self-deprecating humor that comes from observing someone thrive effortlessly at a time when you feel utterly incapable. There's also a subtle moment of self-reflection, the kind that Nate's humor captures so perfectly. You start thinking about all the decisions that led you to this point, why you decided to wake up early, whether it's worth it, smart, and how your life choices could have been different if mornings weren't apparently designed as a form of punishment for night owls. The internal dialogue is relentless, dramatic, and hilarious. Maybe I'm doing mornings wrong. Maybe mornings are doing me wrong. Maybe mornings just don't care about me at all. The hook here is the universal relatability. Viewers see themselves in these thoughts and laugh at the dramatized absurdity of it all. Even minor accomplishments feel monumental. Pouring a second cup of coffee without spilling, finding your shoes, successfully tying them becomes a victory lap in the small theater of your morning. Style humor emphasizes these tiny triumphs because they are both ridiculously mundane and deeply relatable. The hook keeps the audience engaged because the exaggeration of small, everyday tasks resonates with anyone who has struggled to function before noon. It's the perfect combination of self-deprecation, comedy, and shared human experience. As the morning winds down, you start to appreciate the subtle joys of surviving early hours. The world hasn't ended, your coffee didn't betray you, and you didn't embarrass yourself in ways that are permanently scaring. You may not be a morning person, but you made it through, and that sense of quiet victory is amplified by observing those who naturally thrive at this hour. The comedy comes from the exaggerated contrast and the audience's recognition of their own struggles mirrored in your narrative. The hook, the mix of relief, admiration, envy, and absurdity keeps viewers laughing and nodding along, fully invested in your storytelling. By the end of this chaotic, coffee-fueled journey, you're both exhausted and entertained, a little wiser about the unnatural cruelty of early mornings, but also more appreciative of the humor hidden in every mishap. Style observational storytelling ensures that the audience experiences the mix of chaos, self-reflection, comedic exaggeration that makes these mornings unforgettable. The hook, the combination of relatability, absurdity, minor triumphs, creates a perfect comedic rhythm that keeps viewers engaged, laughing, and coming back for more. And in the end, after all the spilled coffee, burned toast, and internal debates about the cruelty of mornings, I realized something very important. Early risers are basically superheroes, and the rest of us are just mortals trying to survive their daylight hours. You get through it, you laugh at yourself, and maybe, just maybe, you appreciate the chaos of the morning a little bit more. Because no matter how disastrous it gets, there's something funny and strangely comforting about knowing you survived it, coffee in hand, still somehow upright, and ready to face the rest of the day, eventually.